Welcome to Learning with Charlene. I just want to introduce Roz, and I just want to say welcome to Learning with Charlene in sharing information about a human resources practitioner. So I'm just going to give you this opportunity to share more information about yourself.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Charlene. Um, Many moons ago, I never thought I'd end up as an HR professional. My passion was always to be a math and phys ed teacher, full stop, underline, right? And so at school, that was really what I was hell bent on, so I was very involved in sports and maths and so. And then I went into teaching actually as a Patrick School for a year when they had a secondary school division still, because I had applied late for uni. But when I went to uni, I was already doing the subjects I wanted, so I cut out and then taught full time at the Ursuline Convent School's senior division. But and as a maths teacher, I then saw this ad for a trainee accountant, and I thought, wow, if I'm good at maths, I'm going to be good at accounting. When I was interviewed by Peter Booz, it was at the time Palmer Foster, he said to me, "You don't want to be an auditor." I said, "The way you've described it, it sounds very boring." No. So I then instead did corporate secretarial because the offshore business was coming online. And at that time, the firm was probably about 50 people upstairs of Sheffett in Bridgetown. But then it grew and grew and grew. And in the late 80s, when it was growing rapidly, I was asked to lead a department that was involved in the offshore sector. And then just the way I led and managed my department, I was being sucked into all sorts of HR internal stuff. So then when they asked me to be the HR partner, I said, I'm not doing it the way it was done before. I have to do it with a strategy to really develop our people. And at the same time, the offshore sector was catching on, so I started to do recruitment. So I'd be up at Cave Hill. There was no internet in those days, so I was up at Cave Hill researching recruitment practices and doing my own little manual, and so I was thrown into HR, and I started to enjoy it so much that I then set up the internal HR department at Ernst & Young Caribbean, because by then we were a Caribbean firm, and also our external consulting practice. And that was primarily recruitment, but then we took it to like a talent development level with a lot more training and development. And I'm the type of person that if I do the same thing too long, too often, I'll get bored with it. So I am always looking for cutting edge ways to do things and coming up with ideas that people think, oh, that's too fancy, or that's too big, or that's going to be too much work. And I love to say, sit and watch me if you're not going to help. So that's how I actually was responsible for developing both the internal and external HR at EY Caribbean. And then in 2005, I set up my own practice, Caribbean Catalyst Inc. And if anybody hasn't heard of Caribbean Catalyst Inc., you need to visit us on our website. We operated from River Road until last year. We're operating from home now, and that's really brought out more of my creative juices in ways that we can do even things like the remote training better than we did the face-to-face. And what I think is very important in HR is caring about people enough to give them some tough love sometimes. You know, people say I get into HR because I like people. Well, I like people too. I like them enough to tell them when they're doing foolishness and put them straight.
So what we'll do is we'll make sure that your information for your website is also in our description. So if anyone wants to hear more information about Caribbean Catalyst, they could also go and find out more. We always recognize different professionals in different ways, and there are movers and there are shakers, and we recognize HR professionals as being both. In reading an article on the Balanced Career .com about human resource professionals and the changing role of a HR professional, it defined the field as one which was more closely aligned with personnel and administrative functions, as you described as well, that were viewed by the organizations as merely paperwork. We can safely say this certainly occurred more in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, dare say maybe the 90s as well. How would you describe the new role and the responsibilities of an HR professional?
Well, to be very honest, as a practitioner in the Caribbean, I would have to say that a lot of companies are still transitioning from the administrative HR and seeing HR as programs, like a performance management, this training program, that training program. And I am always telling my fellow practitioners, do not programize HR. HR is a very strategic function in any organization, right? And the same way the CFO manages the budget, manages the finances of the company, and while they help other managers manage everything, HR has the responsibility of managing the human resource. Unfortunately, when you look at a set of accounts, where does the human resource value add show up, right? And I will always point out to leaders when I'm consulting that when you look on the balance sheet, you don't see HR. When you look on the P&L, you see it as salaries and wages and national insurance and so. So you are viewing it as an expense and not an investment. So strategic HR has to help the leadership view the development of their talent as a strategic investment in their business. And before, there was always a line on a balance sheet called goodwill, which was a figment of anybody's imagination. But in a sense, that's the value that was added. Added by whom? The human beings, right? And then the other thing is this, I say to them, if your people are just an expense, why don't you stop paying them for a month and let them go home and see how much business you have? So we have to help leaders better lead that very important asset, the talent. So to me, an HR practitioner, either on the inside or the out, if they're operating at the strategic level, will need to make sure that the leaders, managers, supervisors have sufficient skills to hire right, and they could use you as a resource, but HR is not the garbage dump for everything you don't want to deal with. So you have to hire right, you have to train and develop people right,
Right.
you have to remunerate them right,
Right.
you have to promote them right, and you have to fire them right too,
Yes.
right? So to me, it's this intangible asset that you cannot do without, but if you can really rev it up and get people working as a genuine team, that's your competitive advantage.
That sounds that sounds very strategic in just saying, okay, well, I'm not just gonna have an HR person, but your role is bigger than just the post itself. It's on a larger scale. You're leading the organization to do more and better productivity wise. So to gain an extra edge and to become more competent in the field of HR, what skills, or rather special skills, we could call them special skills,
Yeah.
should a person develop?
So what is the critical knowledge, be it certified knowledge or uncertified knowledge, skills and attributes that you need? Now what I described is like the equivalent to the CFO. So that's at the pinnacle of the HR career. And in fact, some enlightened companies now have a CHRO,
Wow.
right? Chief
Yeah.
HR officer, right? But in order, you don't wake up one morning and be a CHRO or have all those things that I just talked about.
Right.
So where do you start?
Correct.
And I think it starts by you really caring about human beings enough that when you find yourself in a work environment, you want to influence everybody to be the best version of themselves almost. But the knowledge that is, you need to understand organizational structures.
Right.
You need to understand traditional organizational behaviors and how they have changed over the years and how they need to change going forward, right? So a lot of it is probably based around some psychology and neuroscience.
Right.
So you don't have to become a neuroscientist, but you need to be able to read some of the research and understand
Right.
how the human brain works. You need to also study how HR evolves in companies, and things that are appropriate for very large companies may not be appropriate for small to medium-sized
It's very true.
businesses.
Very true.
And so you have to understand the environment you're working in, what the company is trying to achieve as its business objectives, and the business of the business, you know?
Yeah.
So are we looking for people to write research papers? And we need academics. Are we looking for people to produce things that the market wants and to be able to flex when the market changes? Then we have to work to develop a culture of like a growth mindset. To me, when I was internal HR at EY, I saw myself as having a key role in influencing the culture of the organization. Now, if you're starting out in HR, you know, because typically in a large company, you may have a 6 or 7 or 8 person HR department.
Right.
Some HR departments handle payroll, and especially where there is like overtime pay, and it's not just, so they handle payroll because of the confidential nature, because they have people in there. So learning payroll practices and the laws that govern payroll would be a good skill to have. The other thing that the HR departments will do is keep the personnel files, hard copies still, I don't know why, but some laws require certain things still be kept by hard copy. So you need to be au fait with the the Employees' Rights Act. That's the major piece of legislation
And that changed the
governing HR, but there are other pieces that come into play. So you have to understand the legislation, because you should really work to be becoming the advisor to the leaders of the company.
Right.
So you don't start off advising about what you don't know about, so you go and learn the ropes. But I keep saying it is so important for the HR people working within one organization to understand the business of that business. What is critical to that business? You know, what are the skills and attributes needed for that business to really succeed? How do we help hire them in and train and develop them? Because if you have, like, constant turnover, that's very destabilizing for an organization. On the other hand, if you have no focus on attitude, attributes, and culture, and people are allowed to get away with any old nonsense, then you may not have much turnover, but you may be creating a downward pull in the productivity of the organization. Because sometimes longevity can be a double-edged sword.
Precisely. So, I know you mentioned psychology is a good field to study, but our channel discusses all the steps involved in becoming a professional.
Yeah.
So let's start from the beginning, say in secondary school.
Yeah.
What subjects would you advise a person who's looking into this career as a path to study to become an HR professional?
I would actually suggest they do some accounting and business studies.
Okay.
Because you need to understand the numbers
Right.
and be able to see how you can help influence those numbers.
Right.
Because you are in charge of the talent. It's the talent that delivers the numbers. The numbers don't deliver themselves.
Right.
Right? So doing business and accounting at a secondary school level and getting a grasp of some basic things of organizational structure and how a balance sheet works and how a P&L works is a good grounding.
And then you understand the organizational structure
Yeah.
and different types of organizations as well.
Yeah, because you want to influence. I mean, your main job is to make sure that the talent in your organization
Right.
is the best it can be, and that you are finding ways to help people grow and develop
Right.
and to work with a healthy attitude.
Correct.
You know, and one of the things as an HR practitioner I have had serious problems with is leaders saying to me that certain people are good technicians or they're good salespeople,
Right.
but their attitude sucks. So you can't touch them because they're good at these things. I said, but the cost of their toxicity in the environment
Right.
probably outweighs what you think they're bringing in.
Right.
And we don't pay enough attention to that. And the other thing is this, if your culture is unhealthy, you cannot generate real teamwork.
It's true.
Because teamwork requires trust
Yeah.
and an ability for people to be able to speak constructively, openly, and honestly without fear of recrimination.
It's true.
Because teamwork, otherwise we can't get the collective wisdom. And that's one of my favorite sayings in any organization. How do we garner the collective wisdom? Otherwise you're leaving some of your talent value add on the table.
And I guess you have to be able to manage those individuals as well.
Yes.
Because you don't want to say, well, yes, they're good at that, how can you allow them to curb certain behaviors to be able to still be within the organization?
Exactly. You then have to work with them.
Right.
But sometimes where the problem comes is not so much in the individual who knows they're damn good at what they do,
Right.
but the boss who knows that and don't want you to go near that person in case you upset them.
Right.
So you need to work on the boss's head first.
Right. That's true.
Right? And help him understand how that's damaging the productivity and the rest of his team.
Right.
So there's some, and I am always, I think HR, the culture of an organization is so important, but because it's intangible, people shy away from confronting it and dealing with it.
Right.
But if as leaders you don't shape the culture you want, then take whatever you get.
Wow. And that comes to another interesting question about the character of the person. What type of characteristic of that individual would be more suited for this profession?
I think there's got to be an ability to influence people.
Right.
So when I think of character and personality, I tend to think in the DISC format.
Okay.
Dominant, influencing, steady, consistent, compliant, right? If I want an audit, I want them steady and compliant. But if I want an HR person,
Right.
I want them high on influencing and have some dominance and drive to push it.
Right.
And not just keel over at the first little roadblock, right?
Yeah.
And what HR takes a lot of courage to really help people see the right way. I always say to managers and supervisors when I'm helping them, they want, what does the law say? Disciplinary procedure. I said, stop. The first step of disciplinary procedure is, have you done everything you can to coach them to do the right thing?
Precisely.
Because if you can't show me that you've exhausted that, I'm not going another step with you.
Right.
So your job is to do everything you can. You hired them, they didn't know to walk in and demand the job. They're still on your team, so you've kept them.
Right.
So you have to demonstrate that you've tried everything you did to get them to do what's supposed to be done before you pick up the act. The act is a last resort. When somebody has to go back and look at their contract of employment,
Right.
you're in trouble. That's a last resort document.
Right.
So we need to help people understand that if you have one person reporting to you, a big part of your job is to be that person's coach.
Right.
And HR has to be coach of the coaches.
There you go.
Right? So you need courage. You need a lot of courage to do HR well.
Yeah.
You can't be a bull in a china shop, which sometimes I am, but you have to have the courage to to put the difficult stuff on the table and help people deal with the issues and not just flap around at the tip of the iceberg.
Basically.
Right? So it's very interesting. And you know what? Since we've had to work remotely,
Right.
I found it even more interesting because what I'm doing now, we have rejigged most of our training
Right.
to do it by Zoom. But we've researched what will make Zoom better. It's not about taking your slide deck and stuffing it in Zoom and
Precisely.
and there's some very interesting things about how the brain works and how you can use Zoom for even a better result sometimes. So we have to engage in what is happening because we as humans are evolving all the time.
Correct.
So the practices of HR have to evolve with them because I don't see myself as an HR practitioner. I see myself as a talent developer.
It's such an interesting way to look at it.
Okay, so we want to give hope to persons who are feeling like, a little doubtful on this path. Maybe, you know what, this might not be the path for me. How, maybe because of what they studied at school.
Yeah.
But how can someone gain, say, because that's just in qualification wise, but there's also experience.
Yeah.
So how can someone gain experience through, say, volunteerism, which will be relevant to this field?
And what you can also do, we've had some interns at summer arranged by one by UE, the School of Business, and another one by another organization, I can't remember, where somebody actually comes and works the summer with us, but maybe I make the institution set objectives.
Right.
So what it is I can learn. The other thing you can do is any summer job or holiday job you get.
Right.
I don't care if it is packing shoes, if it is sweeping the floor at Payless, what it is. I want you to observe the human behavior in the workplace.
Right.
Because we observe human behavior in the family. In the workplace, there's a slightly different dynamic. And what you have to understand is if people, sometimes you may go in new to a company and people, where she come from? Who she think she is? So they don't want to help you.
Right.
But you have to learn to do some research yourself. And in spite of the buff, when you need a question, you ask it. Right?
Yeah.
Do research. There's so much you can learn out there. There's actually a body of research that I would point anybody at any level of HR or business to. And it's an institute called the Neuro Leadership Institute.
Right.
It's headquartered in New York, and the founder is Dr. David Rock. And they have some excellent researchers available on their website. Volunteer, when you're at school, volunteer to captain a team. Get yourself prepped to be the head girl or head boy. Look for leadership positions.
Right.
Begin to learn how to influence people in practical ways. If you have a lot of siblings, how do you influence them?
Right.
How do you listen for understanding? Listening for understanding is the base skill of any leader, right? And it's so lacking in today's world.
Yeah, because I know when you talk about experience, persons always think about just going into a company, but you can gain experience far greater outside of that experience as opposed to just going into the company.
Yeah, because a lot of people, especially around my age group, they try to apply for work at these specific jobs, whatever field they're in, and they say, how are we supposed to get work experience? How you expect me to get experience? But they don't realize that all these other things that we do, volunteer work, family life, anything, any teams you're in, that is experience for leadership roles. So it all counts.
And I think you're absolutely right, because our daughter is a very hardback woman now, but when she was finishing 5th form and she was going to go and do grade 11 and 12 in Canada, she didn't know if she wanted to do the arts or the sciences.
Right.
So to boil down to 3 subjects at A level,
Correct.
and she had the luxury of parents who only had one child, so she could afford to send her. And she really got hooked on arts, and she wanted to do graphic arts. And when she came back home at 16, she applied to a printery.
Right.
And they said, we have no budget for a summer student. She said, I'll work for free.
Right.
Now, anybody does, she chose it. It wasn't pushed on her.
Right.
Because you gotta be careful of slave labor and child labor. But she said, I want the experience, right?
Right.
So she worked, and when we had projects on, she worked overtime. She didn't have any money to buy lunch, and it wasn't far from where we lived at the time.
Right.
So she would drive the little car I had left her for, to home and back. And when she left,
Yeah.
she asked for a reference.
Right.
That reference letter praised her work ethic, her creativity, and at the bottom of it, they said she was always on time, she was never late back from lunch.
Right.
Nobody would believe that she was not being paid.
Wow.
Now, to me, when you can carry a reference letter like that,
Yeah.
that speaks volumes,
Right. It's true.
right? But, and then the next summer, what did she do? She worked with her father in the garage. She dealt with all the accounting, with booking the cars, helping deliver them and everything. I said, well, don't get a reference letter from your father. That will be seen as nepotism. But you can write down the experience you have. But by the time you get to a certain age, and that drops off your CV,
Yeah.
because you now have, corporate world experience. But you have to start somewhere.
Precisely.
Even the volunteer work you do, be it with the RSPCA or whatever, all of those things that when I am looking at people now entering the world of work,
Right.
how did you show interest and leadership? A desire to do things that, that were not in your job description.
Precisely.
Because while you don't want people to abuse you in the workplace, you learn and grow by doing things outside of your job description because you're developing more of a growth mindset.
Right. I know you spoke about how rewarding this field is, but I'm still going to ask the question in case something else new comes up. I'm going to ask you, how rewarding is this field in the sense that what brings you delight or brought you delight to continue in the field?
The best thing is when you get through to somebody who didn't want to even hear about HR before.
Right.
I mean, I've had clients that have asked me to come and do performance management.
Right.
And when I speak to them, do you really want performance management or you want a carrot and a stick? Because the only way a carrot and a stick works is if you've hired a lot of jackasses, right?
Right.
So I did a little survey of some of his people, a one-pager, and when I showed him, he tore it up. He said, they think I'm the problem. I said, yeah, you are the problem, right? And about 3 years later, he saw me socially, and he said, are you ready to work with me yet? I said, no, it's the other way around. Are you ready for me yet?
I guess
Because it's not
behavior.
just as a consultant
Yes.
who owns her own business, admittedly, and have a real freedom.
Yeah.
But I think the type of consulting we do, and my team has permission to have the same approach. We cannot work for people who do not believe sufficient of what we believe, or else it will not make a difference. And you know what? We paid Cathers for Rosalinds Journey and all this money, and still got the same problem. Yeah, well, if you happen to be a problem, you still have you, right? So you have to get your joy from seeing people doing things they didn't think they could do.
I think it's a matter of like thinking outside the box rather than they didn't expect this is the problem, but in analyzing and dissecting what the organization requires, you were able to bring forth a different light to them.
And their clients will call me and say, I want you to do this. Send me a quotation. I said, excuse me, I have to sit and meet with you and understand a number of things.
Yes.
Because it's different for every person, every business is not going to be the same.
I said, would you go to a new doctor, violently ill, the doctor don't even look at you, far less touch you, writes a prescription, you can go and take that medicine?
Right.
No. So we have to do our diagnosis and see whether or not we can help you.
Right.
And I actually treat like major things. This is an intervention.
Right.
This is I had a presentation I used to do one time, and the first slide was a female magician with a broken magic wand. And I would say, my magic wand broke last week, so I don't have any magic dust to put on your organization. Tell me what the problems are, and let me see if I can help.
It's true.
Right? So, to be an HR, I mean, for me, I don't even say think outside the box. I say there is no box.
Right.
It's really, and you have to want to help people, but you have to want to help them enough that you are going to respectfully and honestly
Right.
give your true opinion, even if they may find it a little offensive at first. It takes courage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I, as I said, rightfully HR practitioner.
Yeah.
So you've shared a lot of information in terms of what it requires, what you could do. You gave some suggestions. So I have a final, it's called like a debate question, because we've asked the previous professional as well. So finally we asked all guests basically, what would you recommend, qualifications or experience?
It has to be a combination of the two. You have to be very articulate, by the way.
Right.
And you have to be able to think deeply and understand the person in front of you and the best way to approach them. So that's where a little psychology comes in.
Right.
That's where understanding a little neuroscience will help, right? So you need to do the research and the reading and the studying and the certification, whatever you want to do.
Right.
But you also have to practice, right? It really is a practice, right? So even opportunities, if you are volunteering in a team sport, and you may not be the captain, but you see things happening that you know are not in the best interest of the team.
Right.
You then have to find a way. How do I, without causing big ruction, do something about this? What would be my best approach? Should I talk to the people involved first? Will they even give me time of day? Try that. Do I need to involve the coach? So you have to learn to assess the human behaviors in a situation and then try. There's no set formula for anything.
Right.
You then have to think, well, put yourself in the other person's shoes. Even try to understand. And sometimes people are angry for something that's happened in their past life.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean they're a bad person. So you may have to help them get some counseling on the side. And sometimes if you point people in the right direction, you'll be surprised at the change it makes in them.
That's true.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing some very valuable information on the field of HR professionals. I'm hoping that this information will travel far and be impactful on at least one person in their career path, right?
Okay. And I mean, our website is undergoing a total remake, but and when it's done, it's going to be more exciting. But I am quite happy to answer questions, or if anybody wants.
So what we'll do is we'll open the questions at the bottom if there are any comments, and it can always forward them to you and see what happens there.
Brilliant.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I hope you enjoyed our video.